Well, today marks the first International Day for Clean Air for Blue Skies. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres marked the day by urging the world to pay for far greater attention to air pollution. He says that 9 in 10 people breathe air that is damaging to their health. Guterres has also called on governments still providing finance for fossil fuel-related projects in developing countries to shift that support towards cleaner energy and sustainable transport. Researchers say that development funding for efforts to tackle air pollution falls far short of what is needed. The United Nations says that this year's lockdowns have caused emissions to fall dramatically, providing a glimpse of cleaner air in many cities. But it adds that emissions are already rising again and in some places surpassing pre-COVID-19 levels. The UN is pushing for a big drop in greenhouse gases to help limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Well, to talk a little further on this, I'm now joined via Zoom by climate and energy campaigner at Greenpeace Africa, Nhlanhla Sibisi. Thanks so much indeed for joining us and welcome to the programme. I guess a day like this is better late than never, but maybe a day that we should have had years ago, if not decades.
Yes, certainly, Peter. I would say that it's something that's long overdue. And to back that up, we can say that, the research work that has been done, even by the WHO, proves that air pollution is a definite huge problem, globally. And unfortunately, it is costing us lives. And unfortunately, that's something that we should have done or looked at, decades ago.
Is it, Africa is a continent of large open spaces. A lot of our cities do have manufacturing areas and mining. But is air pollution something that we are grappling with on the continent?
Well, I would say, especially in the case of South Africa, Peter, because we have the hotspot when it comes to air pollution, and that's as a result of the coal-fired power station and the setup of our economy. But compared to other African countries, I wouldn't say that South Africa is far better. Actually, it is worse. But the continent on its own, we do see some good examples, for example, in other countries where they don't yet have coal-fired power stations. Instead, they're going for clean and sustainable options like renewable technologies. And we are still way behind when it comes to that.
Is that the biggest contributor to the pollution? I mean, we have an aging fleet of cars on the continent, sadly, as well, and they must be part of the problem.
And an aging fleet of coal-fired power stations, which is one of the things as Greenpeace we are calling for the government to actually to decommission those coal-fired power stations, because that's where the huge amount of emissions in the case of South Africa, it comes from. And it's as a result of us using coal or burning coal and other fossil fuels. And yes, you can also include the combustion engine. In the case of, the big cities like Cape Town, Johannesburg, there's a lot of pollution that you can see. But the main factor in the case of South Africa is coal.
We have a problem with fires as well, here in South Africa in particular, but other parts of the continent. How much does that also contribute to damaging the quality of air?
Yes, the unfortunate thing is we've seen, for example, in some parts of the Congo Basin where there has been the clearing of forest and some parts of the forest actually being burnt. And yes, when we look at the satellite data that has been provided by organizations like NASA, we see quite a lot of SO2 that has been released into the atmosphere. That's sulfur dioxide, and that's one of the dangerous pollutants. So the burning of fires, like we've seen in Brazil, for example, the burning of forest, unfortunately, they release a lot of carbon that's actually captured in those trees and on the ground. So that is also one of the huge problems that we are facing with globally, not only on the continent.
So, I mean, when we hear statistics that 9 out of 10 people are breathing some element of polluted air, this must translate into real health problems. Are people dying from bad air?
Yes, and globally, actually, as a result of bad air quality, this is research that's also released by UNEP, where there's an estimation globally of over 7.2 million people that die as a result. And if you look at that stat, as you rightfully pointed out, 9 out of 10 people actually breathing bad air. So one of the things that we're calling for, Peter, is to say that governments across the globe, including South Africa, they need to make public health a priority, but include in their planning of policies that air quality, as a result of the different sources that we've mentioned, whether it's coal-fired power stations, etc., that it has a huge impact, and that also translate into having a negative impact on the country's GDP. So we need a holistic approach when we're thinking about what kind of policies that we need to implement to address air pollution, because this is just not an isolated, incident, because there are other ramifications.
There is a measure that we seem to have fixated on quite a bit now, and that's carbon footprint. And I wonder if we need to be energizing ourselves in other measures, as in the quality of air.
Yes, for sure. We definitely need to be looking. If we start from the point of saying that, what impact does it have? And especially, if you look at the fact that the huge impact that bad air quality has, it has an effect on the most vulnerable, people who are sick, and people who are much younger, their immune system haven't yet developed, or people who are actually older. So these are things that when we actually need to address, that are things that we need to think of, in the sense that what is the impact, not only on the economy, but one that is definitely not acceptable in a situation where we can address the air pollution situation, and looking at different options that can address that.
Are the policymakers understanding of what the issues are? I guess it's a challenge. You talk about coal-fired power stations, but in a developing country, you need energy, and they're there, and you have rich resources of coal. So how do you manage in that kind of environment where you've got a resource that's available, you need energy to develop the country, and yet you're being told that you need to think about cleaner energy?
I think the first part of your question is to say that the policymakers don't seem to be able to connect the dots, the huge focus, unfortunately, is on the economy, and that's growing the economy, but at what cost? And in the instance of addressing, like, for instance, the coal-fired power station issues, we know that South Africa has developed a policy that has been lauded throughout, the world, in terms of the renewable energy policy that we've developed about a decade ago. And unfortunately, that procurement policy, when it comes to the procurement of renewables, so that we can be able to phase out our coal-fired power stations, was stopped on its track. And these are things that policymakers need to consider, that what other technologies are available out there, as opposed to the burning of fossil fuels alone in the case of coal-fired power stations, and also to look at the health impacts, because the health impacts, as I mentioned earlier, they unfortunately have a financial impact on the fiscus. And so if policymakers really want to make a difference in terms of us getting clean air, they need to connect the dots. They need to understand how we can address the air pollution problem, and that is trying to phase away, not actually trying, but to phase away the burning of fossil fuels, whether it's through coal-fired power stations or other types of fuels. But a holistic approach when it comes to policy making needs to consider human health as much as it also considers the economy.